Hello mate and welcome back to Let's Code Season 6. In this episode we are going to start creating things for the map. Now you might remember in the previous episodes we talked about this init 0 Python and so on, the order of things that they need to be written in. And we are going to have to make some dynamic changes to those things as we go along. For example, at the moment the game class is init 3 Python, but we've got a player class and a map class which have to be declared prior to that. But we also have the game object class now in at 0 Python. Now, there are no issues with calling things that are passed in as parameters, so we can still tell the game objects to interact with the player class because they're actually interacting with an instance of the player class that's passed in as a parameter. We're not actually creating a player character within the game object, so that's fine. But as you can imagine, as we go along and we create things like rooms and maps and loot and enemies and things like that, init 3 Python for game is going to creep up. So we might as well preemptively do that, and we'll put it at init 20 Python just for now. That way we know for certain that it's not going to interfere with anything that we're dealing with now. Now likewise, we also need to move the player and the game map objects out to the right, so we can come to player class. Currently that's set to 1, so I'm going to actually set that to 18. Save that, and then we need to also come to our map class, and I'm going to change this to 19. Save that. That way we've got room to create things prior to that. Now we know that the rooms in the map are going to need to be able to add game objects to them. They're going to be the things that populate their own cells in the grid. So we need game map rooms to be fairly high up in that order as well. So let's go ahead and create a new file, and we'll just call this game_room.rpy, and we will give this init 17 Python. That way we know that we've got 15 odd spaces which we can use to create the room's objects, such as loot, enemies, whatever. We're doing this primarily because we've decided to create each one of our classes in a separate file to keep things organized. If you were doing this all in one file, you wouldn't have to do this. You would just have to make sure that the classes are declared in the right order in that one file. But because we're trying to keep things organized, we're using the init 17 yada 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 Python thing to make sure that we are in fact working correctly. Okay. Now when we talk about our game maps rooms, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking, oh well, we need 20 or 30 different subclasses because we're going to have all different types of rooms. And you could argue that that may be the case if we were going to have a map that had perhaps different biomes and things like that, and each room had wildly different characteristics. But realistically, from a coding perspective, all our rooms really are is grids. They're spaces in the memory that contain a grid of cells, X and Y, and in each one of those cells there is potentially going to be an object, and the ones that don't have objects in them will allow the player to move through them. So realistically all it is a two-dimensional array, but we're going to have some other characteristics such as the room's name, the exits to the room, and obviously they need to keep track of the objects actually within the room as well. So it's not quite as cut and dried as just creating a two-dimensional array. So let's jump straight in anyway. So we're going to create a new class, and we're going to call this room. And it's not going to inherit from anything. Now we need to go define init. Obviously it needs to create an instance of itself. Now what other parameters do we need within this room itself, and which ones do we actually create from the map? Because the map is going to create the rooms are going to populate themselves with objects, but what characteristics does the room need that we can't create inside the class itself? Now in this case what I think we need to do is actually have a name that's going to be created during the initialization, the instantiation of the object. We can also have a list of exits. And what else do we need? Now we could have a description, because I wasn't intending to make this a text-based adventure. The plan was that this was going to actually be a graphical dungeon crawler, i.e. you can see the grid, but it wouldn't hurt to still have a description within the object. And if we don't use it, we don't use it. We can just delete it later. In fact, thinking about it, let's remove the description. We will remove the description and we will instead give it a room type. That way we can just say if it's a dungeon room, it has a certain description. If it's a log cabin room, all those kind of things, we can just have those actually created within the class itself, just to minimize the amount of niff-naff and trivia that we have to put in when we create the room. Because bearing in mind that this is going to be an automated process, hopefully, so we want this to have as little information required as possible. So name, exits, and type. I think type is going to be the main thing here, because the type can also dictate how much food and drink the player uses per turn and things like that. And also it might dictate how the room looks as well. So let's just leave it with those three things for now. So we obviously have to say self underscore name equals name, and we have to put a dot there as well. Thought I had, but there you go. Self dot underscore exits equals exits. Self dot underscore type equals type. And there we go, we've encountered our first problem. So we'll just change this to room type. There we go, and that way we won't get collision there. So that's good. We could have a size parameter in here as well, but I feel like for now just having all the rooms the same generic size will be fine. Yes. So how many cells X and Y do we actually want? I feel like if we make it too big, it's going to take the player hours to get across the room, and they'll have run out of hunger and stuff like that before they explore a room. So we need to be a little bit realistic about this. I'm thinking that 20 by 15 is probably enough. So we'll just change this to size. So there you go. So now we've got a room size, and I think we'll just leave that as it is, as like a fixed size for now. So we need to create a two-dimensional array, or also known as a matrix, for the cells in our room, so that our room actually knows how many cells it's got available to use. So we're going to go self dot underscore matrix equals, and now we're going to create a two-dimensional array. So it's going to be 0 for X in range. And now we're going to use the first part of our size, which is going to be self dot underscore size, and that's going to be 0. So that's going to be the first element of our size. This thing here we've already created, so that's going to be 20. And then outside of the first array, we're going to say for Y in range, and now we're going to say self dot underscore size, and that's going to be the second element. So hopefully that should be sufficient to populate our array with a 25 by 15 grid of zeros. So here I am in my console. You can see I've just typed in, I'm creating a new instance of our room class. I'm just going to hit enter there, and that's gone through no problem. And then we'll just do print room dot underscore matrix, and there you go, there is our grid, all containing zeros for the time being. I could have populated them with none or anything like that, but I think 0 is fine, because we can just run a check to say if it's not equal to 0, then it'll contain something else, because these are all going to be populated with, or where there are objects, they will be populated with instances of the thing that is there, instead of just the number 0. So that's fine, so that works. So what I want to be able to do now is actually add an item to that grid. So there's different things that we're going to have to do here, but the first one is we're going to have to create a new method called add item xy, and that is going to allow us to add an item to a specified x and y coordinates. So we actually need three things to be input here as parameters. We need the x and we need the y. Alternatively, we could just say give us the position, the item itself. Now we can't use the word item because that's reserved, so we're just going to have to say game item instead. So we need to make a point here of annotating this to say that to add a game item to the position must be a tuple. That way we know if we refer back to this, we've sort of given ourselves a reminder. So we'll just add another comment here saying the two-dimensional matrix grid. I think everything else is fairly self-explanatory in this case, so we don't need to annotate that for the time being. And there's a number of things that we should probably do here. We should probably check that the position is within our grid size. Otherwise, it should throw an exception just in case something goes horribly wrong, or at least catch the error. So there are sort of means of doing that in Python, but we'll go into those later on in the Let's Code series. Once you've got to grips with the things that we're doing, I don't want to throw too many complicated things out at once. So all we'll do is we will just say if position 0 is less than or equal to self._size. Now, as you can see, I've already made a faux pas there, so we're going to fix that now. I'm going to create a getter for our size. Get size. Self return self._size. Now we can use get size here instead, and that's going to be equally 0, and position 1 is less than or equal to self.get size 1. So we're just double checking that the numbers that we've been given are actually within the ranges. I should probably add a check to make sure that they're also greater than 0 or equal to 0, but let's just work with what we've got for the time being. The coordinates that we've been given are within our grid size. Now we want to check that the thing that we're trying to add, the grid that we're trying to add to, the grid square that we're trying to add to, is actually empty, because we don't want to be able to add more than one object. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if matrix, so we need to actually do get matrix here as well. We need a getter for the matrix. Return self._matrix. There we go. So if get matrix now, this is interesting. I'm actually having a bit of a think. Yeah, I think this is the simplest way of doing it. It's fine. So if we're going to have to now go into coordinates here, so we're going to go copy that there and paste it there. And then we need to add our second coordinate, which is going to be position 1. So we're saying if the matrix position 0, position 1 is not equal, and we will do a not equal to 0, then we just return out of this, and we'll do print cell is not empty, return. And that will cut out, it will basically not do this command, it will stop there if there is already something in that position. Otherwise, we will continue on and we will say, in fact, we can now grab this that there equals game item. There you go. That's all there is to it, really. So before we go any further, we also need to add self to the beginning of that. Otherwise, we're going to get an error. Likewise, we also need to change these to properties. So they actually function as they're meant to. And what else? Oh yes, we also need to change this back. So this is going to be self._matrix because we cannot add an item to a property. That is a getter. We can't add an item to a getter. So we've fought that problem before that becomes a problem. Another thing we can do that I completely spaced out on is we can actually just check that our two tuples are, we can actually equate them. So we can say if position is less than or equal to self.getSize, that should also work. Any other mistake? Oh yeah, I made a spelling mistake there. That doesn't say position. So add item self position. I've also need to change this to a capital R, which I forgot to do, so I've just done it. Okay, so that should now all be fine. Make sure we save it and then we can test it. Okay, so we're back in our script. First thing I need to do is create a room. So we're going to go room equals room, and then we're just going to call it test room. Going to give it exits. We'll just give it an empty list there, and then room type will just go sausage for now. So that's created our new room, and now we should be able to room.add item xy. Position we'll just go with 0 0 for now. No, actually let's not. Let's go with 10 10 so that it looks interesting. And then as our second parameter, we need a game item. So I'm going to go with health potion with a value of 10. Matrix, get matrix is not defined. What have I done there? Let's have a quick look at our code. Self.getMatrix. And where have I, yep, there we go. I've screwed it up. We need to get self.getMatrix there. We need to make sure that we actually refer to the correct thing. So that was our error. It's an easy one to make. So we'll do a come out of there, reload on our code, back in. There we go. Now we've got our grid. So now if we go to print room.getMatrix, what we should see is there we go. In position 10, 10, we now have a health potion object in that grid. So that's fine. So I also want to add a method that will actually add an item to a random place in the room so that we don't have to constantly give it X and Y coordinates. So we're going to just close this down like so. So we're now going to have to use some random number generator stuff. I don't like using RNG too much when it comes to programming games. However, if it's just to choose a position within the room that we're going to put an object, that's fine. I can live with that. Okay. Now, there are certain checks that we have to do further down the line. For example, because the player will be able to occupy the same space as game objects, but not certain obstacles, when we add objects to random positions within the room, we also need to double check that they're not right in front of a door, because otherwise the player will spawn into the room when we change into that room, and they will automatically be on top of an object. So that's something that we need to think about further down the line, but for now we'll just keep things super simple. So now we're going to go to define add item, and we don't necessarily care about where it's going to be, so this time we just need to add game object there. Now we need to use the random number generator, and if we were just coding this in pure Python, we'd actually have to import the random number module, but Ren'Py actually has its own random number module, which basically just implements the random module, so we can already use that. So what we need to do now is get two integers that are random, and what I should probably do is actually create a, no, actually we'll do it recursively. So we're going to say x pos is equal to ren'py.random.randint. So what we're saying is Ren'Py's random module, and we're going to use the random integer command, and now we need to give it 0 is going to be our lowest possible number, and then we'll do self.getMatrix 0. That's going to be our x coordinate. And then we're going to say ypos equals renpy.random.randint 0, self dot matrix 1. So that is going to, in fact, no, we don't need to do get matrix. We can do get size. I apologize. We don't need to mess around with that. There we go. So there we go. If we'd done get matrix, it would have returned the values in 0 and 1, which would have thrown an error. So there we go. We've got get size. So now we've got two random numbers between 0 and 20 and 0 and 15. That should be fine. Actually, no, we need to do -1. I tell a lie. On both of these. The reason being is that we've got a grid 20 wide, but 20 wide is 0 to 19, not 1 to 20. So we've got from 0 to 19 here, not 0 to 20. So that will work just fine. Now what we need to do is say if we need to check that, basically check that it's 0. So we'll just grab this bit. So we can actually change these to say xpos ypos. So we're saying if the grid space that we've just generated random coordinates for is not empty, then we will recall. We're going to do this recursively. Like that. We're just going to basically we're going to keep doing this, and then we'll do a return afterwards. We're basically saying if it is not 0, if there's something in that space, we need to go back to the start and basically recall, regenerate our random numbers until we get to random numbers. And then what I'll do is to keep doing that until we get what we want. Now we need to actually add our game item. So now we grab this line, copy that one, paste that there, and then we'll just change our positional argument from that to that. Okay, so what I've done is I've removed the if statement and just given it a while loop because it just means one less line of code. So, and I've also added print x and y to our function just temporarily, just as a debugging tool, just to make sure that we're getting things around, because upon testing what I realized was I've actually got these the wrong way around. That needs to be the y position, that needs to be the x position, and the same thing here, because of the way that we created the array. Our array is y dominant. So we need to put y before x in here because that's actually the y coordinate, that's the x coordinate. The way we display it on the screen won't necessarily be any different, but this will allow us to actually get our code functioning without any errors, because if you get these back to front, what you'll get is you'll get index errors, which means that the game will constantly throw its toys at the pram when you try to add an item because it won't let you do it. So likewise, we also should probably check that we've got these the right way round, so we can just change that to that there and swap these around as well, like that. There we go. So now we've made some changes, we've got everything working properly, so now we should have it run with no errors. So we're going to create a new room, and then we just add our test in there, have an empty list there, and then again we'll have this room type being sausage. There we go. So now we can just pull our curtain back and we can now add a random item. So room dot, spell room correctly, room dot add item health potion 10. And we can see it prints out the x and y coordinates that that object has now been added to. So it's been added to 314. So now if we go to print room dot get matrix 314, 14, it says 0, 0. But if we go 14, nope, 14, 3, there you go. You can see that we now have a health potion at the relevant coordinates. So that's good. So now our add item function works correctly, and our add item XY function works correctly. So now we are good to move on. But I think for what we've achieved in this video, we've gone for quite a while. I think we're going to knock it on the head at this point, and we'll move on to doing more stuff with our room class in the next video. But until then, you take damn good care of yourselves, all right? Bye-bye.